Hey guys, welcome back to the Primed Fatherhood podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Condi, and this is episode 10. This episode is the second part of my two-part interview with Chief of Police Darin Adams. He's a father of three, and in this episode, we focus more on the family dynamic, where in the previous one, we focused on leadership and career. Stay tuned as Darin teaches how he balanced his ambition with his family responsibilities. He also gives great guidance on how to build strong relationships with family and coworkers, as well as why it is important to have courageous conversations. We have answered the call. We are committed to a greater purpose. We are fathers. Past achievements do not guarantee future success. We will prime ourselves often to navigate each new challenge. We are capable, brave, and relentless. We will remain undaunted. I think that one of the biggest challenges for someone with ambition is to be able to balance your career and all of the things that you're trying to do within the community with your responsibilities to your family. Can you walk us through how you've handled that?
Sure. So I don't know if I've always handled it, but I've certainly tried because I've stumbled a lot. So I think early on I tried to recognize as I was going different directions that I still needed to be present. And I wasn't always the best at that. I mean, I would go from working a shift here to an ambulance call there, or, working as a police officer. And then on those days off, as I mentioned in the last episode, would spend my days off working as a nurse. And so there were a lot of times where I wasn't there and my wife was making sure our young girls at the time were being taken care of. But it was important for me to try and attend as much of their activities as possible, and I did. I didn't miss very many. And so sometimes that was in uniform. If I was working, I would swing by the soccer field, or if I was on call, I would, drive the first responder unit for the ambulance service to an activity and be there and be present. And so I think as a young father, and even as a not so young father, those moments, you have to understand, evaporate so very quickly. And like we mentioned also in the last episode, time flies and it picks up speed, or at least that's the perception. And so if you can, in that moment, as a young father, try to look toward the future just a little bit and see where you want to be and where you're going, it all starts with making memories and building foundational relationships that are anchored, that will stand the test of time. And I've been blessed in that regard. Now, me and my wife were just talking not long ago. We went to St. George today and did a few things, and we were talking about our three kids and how different they are with a touch of similarity in each one. And then we asked the question, how does that happen? How do three kids raised under the same roof with the same values and guidelines and discipline turn out so differently? Now, granted, we may have slipped here and there with one or the other and weren't consistent with corrective behavior like we were with others. Sometimes that happens. But by and large, it was the same upbringing. And so, that begged the question, how did we do that, or how did we not do that? And I think one common thread that came out of that was being present, and like we had talked about before as well, as a leader, you're communicating with your children. You're allowing them the freedom to communicate with you. Sometimes that's scary. Sometimes it's hard to create a relationship where your children will tell you everything. I think that's what a parent wants, but then you're also fearful sometimes of what they may bring to you. Mm-hmm. And then you ask yourself, I don't know, how do I deal with this? Right? Let's just lock you up. And so I think that's the key is really trying to understand them similar to what we talked about with those that you lead, understanding them, and then trying to help guide and navigate them. And I think the same lessons and rules apply in that you are being compassionate. You're trying to show them the way. You're teaching them those lessons of working hard, 110%. But then there's got to be the positive reinforcement on the other side, so that they see that that what they've done is good, right? It's the reward. I've done good. I will keep doing that, and I will repeat that behavior moving forward. So those were things that I tried to do early on, and I fell short many times, and I still honestly apply those today. My oldest, as you know, is 29, and she's a teacher up north. My middle daughter's 24. She's just finished school and has a job, and then of course my youngest is one I still have a little bit more influence over, and that's Hayden. He's 16, and so just creating those opportunities. We had the opportunity last night, just as an example, to replace a U-joint in his truck. Now, if you like that kind of stuff, then that's going to be, you're on top of the world, right? Some fathers may look at that and say, okay, it's 29 degrees out, and we're going to go out there at night and try to do this and bonk our heads and get dirt in our eyes, and our fingers are going to freeze. Fortunate for me, I enjoy doing that, but there came a point when I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. But as a father, you don't say that. You can think it, but I think it's important to finish that out. Your children are looking for those opportunities, and they're excited, and they want mom or dad there to help share those memories. And it's valuable time. Those are valuable experiences that you just don't get back. And so I don't know if that really answers the question per se, but all that wrapped into one is critical. And there's no perfect roadmap that I found. Those are good guidelines, but you're still going to stumble. But again, it's with that humility and that compassion, they're forgiving, and you will be in favor in their eyes.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think that a big part of dealing with kids especially, but really anyone that you lead, is setting clear expectations up front. How have you done that with your kids, and what lessons have you learned around that?
Sure. So, I think with most families growing up, there's the obvious expectations that you set. Early on, it's curfews and what to do around the house and what chores to take care of and to do this before you can do that. And then as they age and get older, then other things start to creep in. Now you start looking at the use of electronic devices. That wasn't a worry for my parents back in the day because those didn't exist. And then also, dating and what that looks like. And so I think consistency is one thing I've learned that's been the key, because to be quite frank, I wasn't that strict disciplinarian that said, this is the way it is every time. And this is the line you do not cross. And if you do, that's it. I was too soft-hearted. I was overly compassionate and loved my kids. And I learned, some hard lessons that way by not being more firm with certain things and allowing them to step over that line, and realized later on that, I should have done that. I should have set more clear expectations and held them accountable to those things, because that's what, children really are looking for. They don't look for a friend, because they got plenty of those. They'll try to use, certain tactics to make you think they want to be your friend so they get what they want. But they need discipline. They need accountability. They need correction. And so that's probably the biggest thing I learned was being consistent and making sure those rules applied uniformly with all of them, and that they were not wavering. There were some regrets, major regrets I had by not doing that.
What advice do you have for those who are having a hard time finding the right blend of discipline?
Well, I think the first thing that has to be done is there's got to be a united front, and I made mistakes in that realm as well, not communicating, and I think part of that just came through, my job. We often joke that my first child I was a police officer, she was a girl, so I was really overprotective, and socially that was somewhat stunting for her, as she aged, because I was not willing to let her experience things that other kids were. And I look back and think, oh, why would you do that? There's ways to address that and still protect your children. So I think a good balance of making sure that you still allow them to experience life, and understand what is good and what is bad. Doesn't mean they have to experiment, but they understand both sides, and that you strike that balance between allowing them to experience things, but also setting clear boundaries. Say, this is the line. This is the line we will not cross, and then communicating that with your significant other, so you're on the same page. So one child's not pitting one parent against the next and trying to get what they want. And then to have really courageous conversations. We talk about that in leadership positions as well as fathers and mothers. Some people say, well, it's an awkward conversation I don't want to have. Well, it's not. It could be awkward, but I think it's a courageous conversation. It takes courage to sit down and talk about the difficult things. But as you do that, they begin to understand that you truly love them and care for them and want what's best, even though you may not agree with their choice or what they want to do. And I also think it garners greater respect for the father and the mother. May not be in that moment. There may be a lot of, wailing and gnashing of teeth, so to speak, but they will learn to love and respect you. My wife, her mother just passed recently, about a month and a half ago. And in her speech, her talk in the funeral, she read a poem that talked about when she was younger that her mother walked in front of her to lead her, to show her the way. And as she got older, her mother walked a few steps ahead, and then her mother would walk beside her as she got older. And she goes, my mother did this, and she was my mother in those years, because that's what I needed, so that at some point when I became a young adult, we could walk together as friends and enjoy life as friends, because she had been what she needed to be for me in those formative years. And as tough as that may be, as challenging as that may be for parents who look at a child and they love them unconditionally, they're the highlight of their lives, there's going to be times when there's going to be sadness and discipline and angst. And the child may not like mommy or daddy very much, and we've got to push past those and do what we said we were going to do, and stick to those boundaries, and then we can reprove sharply with love, and make sure that even though I had to correct this, I still love you, and this is why it was so important.
That's awesome. I think that's really a pretty deep subject there. What do you do to prep yourself for a courageous conversation, whether it's with your kids or with someone in the force? How do you prepare for that?
Yeah. First of all, I want to make sure that I have everything I need, that the details of whatever we're going to talk about are clear, that the facts are clear. I don't want to, talk with someone that is done something that maybe the information I've received is not accurate. So I think that's an obvious first step. And then the next step is to run that over in your mind, and try to develop some sort of a game plan on how you're going to approach that. And then for me, it's always seeking a little bit of divine guidance through prayer to make sure that I've got what I need to be tactful, but also to be compassionate and be direct, and to make sure that message has been given. I've had that opportunity with staff before, when I see something that is not going maybe the best way. And for the experiences I've had, having those relationships built prior to, as we talked about, with the foundation that's built, helps immensely, because then when they come in, it's just honesty. This is the issue. This is what we're seeing, and this could be applied from a leader perspective or a parent, a father. This is the issue I'm seeing. This is what needs to change. What do you think? Do you think that's right? What's your your view on this and your feelings? And try to get their input, and then unitedly together, how do we fix it? What do we need to do, and how can I help you get there? I think doing it that way, it does provide for a lot less risk of pushback and rebellion and a person ceasing communication because, well, they're just attacking me. It really always needs to be done, whether that's as a leader or a parent, with love and with their best interest in mind. Sometimes people don't see that. As a child, sometimes that you do something, you don't realize that what you did was wrong. And as an adult, sometimes in an organization, you do something and it's hard to see from the outside looking in. And it's important that we do that course correction for those people, and that kind of in that pattern and that sequence, I think, works well.
That's awesome advice. When you're coming up against a really hard task, whether it's in the family or at work, what do you tell yourself to actually get yourself to do it, rather than just let yourself be paralyzed by the fear or the discomfort?
Well, sometimes it's a little bit of a pep talk, I won't lie. I think the biggest thing is understanding and knowing from either perspective that if left unchanged or left uncorrected, potentially it's going to get worse. And then you're in a much more challenging position down the road, whether that's a day, a week, a month later. And so for me, it's having that conversation with myself and asking myself internally, okay, is this really a big deal? Does it need to be addressed in this way? Can it be addressed another way? And if not, which is usually the case, and I know what I need to do, it's just telling myself, this is important. You can apply this to leadership or parenthood. There was a quote out there that says, if I wanted a job where everybody liked me, then I probably should be selling ice cream. And there's a lot of truth to that. As parents, we're not always going to be liked by our kids, and we shouldn't let that guide what we do. And certainly as a leader, we're not going to like or always be liked. And so that's been a challenge for me, for someone who grew up in my agency with a lot of those employees, and having been able to get into a position where I can really make some positive change for people that I really loved, and then hearing back that, well, so-and-so said this about you, or they didn't like that. And I'm thinking, oh, my heart, and that was a fool's errand to think that I could do that. And so I think it's understanding why something needs to be done as a parent or a leader, committing to that, talking yourself up, I guess, or getting yourself in that mode. And sometimes you don't have to do that. Sometimes they're easy things. If those relationships are built, you can do that very easily, I found. If not, it becomes a little bit more challenging for those that you don't know as well. Certainly, I think with a child, it should be a little easier each time because there is that loving relationship. But just committing to that and then, going forward with it.
I want to ask kind of how you guys have dealt with all of the negativity that we've gotten in 2020 towards the police. What are some of your thoughts about how that came about and how you guys have felt, but then also what do you think the next steps are?
Sure. As far as how it started, I wish I knew. I know that there's, just like any occupation out there, You're going to have bad actors in anything that we do. I think police are visible. They carry a level of authority that can infringe upon a person's constitutional rights. So I think that's going to get a little bit more of the spotlight. And I think over time, because some bad actors made choices and some officers that probably never should have been officers did some things that were, to be honest, egregious and inappropriate, it caused people to finally stand up and say, this is not right, and we're going to let our voices be heard. And I respect that. I respect a person's First Amendment right to peacefully assemble and to, redress grievances and to really be heard. We've been blessed. I get this question all the time. And because we have such a loving community, it doesn't mean that we haven't had a few here and there who have spoken ill of us, but you're always going to have that to some degree. When you're arresting people and you're trying to resolve conflict, you're not always going to satisfy both sides. So there's always going to be some unhappy people. But I think by and large, our community, as conservative as it is, loves the police. And what's happened everywhere else, I think, has had the unintended consequence of people coming out of the woodwork to show us that they support us. So when people say, boy, how is that in 2020? My response is, we feel more love than we ever have, because we have people who are sending notes, and kids in school are sending cards, and the food comes in and never stops. And that's not good for us when we have to wear uniforms and vests. We have to keep our figure and stay healthy. But we have felt more support this last year and a half than I ever have in my almost 24 years of doing this. And then that's good. That's really given our guys a boost. So when they do face the negativity, they've got that little extra shot of positivity to carry them through. As far as what's to come, your guess is as good as mine. I think people have ridden a little bit of a wave with a lot of these protests and things. And again, I don't know that they shouldn't. Our founding fathers, I think, when they crafted that divine document, envisioned that people would stand up for themselves, because the government is for the people. And sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And we certainly don't want it to be that way. I want a police department that is leaning largely toward the community policing side, where we do show compassion, where we don't always write a ticket or arrest a person, but we look at them as a human being and try to correct behavior and hope they won't repeat it. And if they do, then we may have to step that up. And it may mean that the criminal justice system, gets activated and we push them through that process. But I think for us, I think we'll continue to see the support and we'll ride that, hopefully for many years to come nationwide. I think people will still continue to be emboldened and courageous to bring about injustice and to shine a spotlight on that. And, again, we don't want that to negatively or adversely affect the rest of us who we think are doing a good job with, possible threats of defunding and things of that nature. But that it would single out those who probably don't belong in this career field and make sure that we do refine what we do, that we step it up, that we make improvements where we can, and really try to be what the public expects from their police department.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's easy for people and for the world, especially in an election year, to let themselves fall into the default of thinking that we live in a black and white world. But in reality, no issue is hardly ever black and white. If you look at things from both perspectives, there's a lot of gray area and a lot of in between and room for interpretation, I would hope that people can see that police are human and they make mistakes, but at the same time, you don't go into that field and put the amount of time in and work the hours that you work without wanting to serve, so I think
that's so true. You're right.
Yeah. And the defund the police thing, I think, is probably the wrong direction. if we want our police force to be more cool and calm under pressure and more thoughtful about how they approach things, then we probably need to put more into the training and more into the screening and spend more time doing drills and practicing, rather than
Right.
cutting it down to the point that there's no one there to protect anyone. So
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I agree, and I think most organizations would agree with that exactly. That's really where we need to be. And that doesn't mean we don't need to look at societal ills and try to find alternative ways to address those, because I think society as a whole has become frustrated, and if there's not an answer to potential or existing conflict of any sort, then let's call the police. And we're not trained to do everything. And sometimes we have to make our way through it the best we can in a quickly unfolding and rapidly evolving event. And we're human, so we're not going to get it right every time.
right. Well, in the field that you're in, and being a dad, and in the context of 2020, what issues are you most concerned about as a father?
From a father's perspective, our children are being targeted more so than ever before. And so, boy, especially as a father, to be engaged in your child's life. So a lot of the stuff we talked about before, to create and to sustain and build upon those vital relationships that you have with your children, to have that open line of communication, and to let them know that there are firm boundaries and lines not to be crossed, and this is what's appropriate and this is what isn't. But you can come talk to me about anything, just because there are so many people out there who are predators and who desire to inflict whatever, some things, unspeakable things upon our children. And the best refuge and the best protection is a stable home with a mother and a father, or significant others who are there, for them. And that father plays a pivotal role in the rearing of his children, and making sure that there's a beacon of hope moving forward, but also to understand what lurks out there, what the threats are, and how to protect themselves. So along with the communication and that foundation, it's being present and being aware. I think all those things really will help to prevent a child from being victimized in some way, or getting off that wrong path and maybe not being able to jump back on very quickly. A lot of the things that we see, and a lot of our increase in calls here, and I suspect it's nationwide, are that discord in the family. So a child lacks that parental involvement. So what do? They try to find that belonging and that love and that care and compassion somewhere else. And there are people out there who are prepared and, to be quite frank, devilish in their ability to take advantage of that, and they will. And we see that all the time. And so if there's a way that we as fathers can be engaged, doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, and we'll still make mistakes. We need to be humble enough to reach out to friends and other fathers that we know and seek advice, and don't be afraid to admit that we don't know everything, but to put those children at the pinnacle of priority in our lives, so that they do have that safe place to be. They do have a way to express themselves, and they're not seeking those things elsewhere. Because I'll tell you, it doesn't take much to find it, and it is ever present, even in Cedar City and Iron County. And so I think the relationship building and the communication and the love and the compassion, all those things that really have been present throughout both of these episodes, are going to be key components in protecting our kids in 2020 and beyond.
That's great. I appreciate that. That's very timely for us. So as we wrap up, is there any organizations that you guys are partnered with, or any programs that you know of that will help dads to do that for their families, to be able to stay engaged and protect them?
That's a great question. We aren't a part or engaged with any specific organization. A lot of our officers are involved with their children in a variety of ways, whether that be through the performing arts, children's musical theater, or Little League baseball, or Southern Utah hoops type programs, whether that be through coaching. The Boy Scouts, maybe not so much as it once was before. But I think the traditional things where dads can collaborate with others and learn from each other's mistakes, but also having that opportunity to spend that quality time with their child and help rear them, and sometimes performing or coaching or mentoring or helping to tie knots or any of those things, makes a big difference in building those relationships. I'm not, and I'm ashamed to say this, but I'm not familiar with any specific organization, at least in our area, that is specifically designed with a mission to provide support for fathers, which we probably need. And maybe that's still part of that stigma and that cultural failure that, well, dads are strong men and they should know everything, and they find a way, which we often do, but not without, the expense of others sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm hoping to do something about that part of it. So.
Well, good. I think you're on the right track with what you're doing now.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, is there any last advice that you would give to fathers who are wanting to learn how to be better family leaders or better career leaders?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what we've talked about in both of these episodes, and it really starts with understanding those you lead and understanding your children, intimately understanding what motivates them, what drives them, what their fears are, building that relationship, and then making it very clear to them that communication is important, it's key, and that you are there and will listen no matter what. Setting those proper boundaries and sticking to those, even though at times you may stumble and fall. That's okay. We get do-overs all the time as dads, and it's okay to know that I can wake up the next day and start over. And then also some of the biggest, and that is just being humble and admitting your mistakes to those you lead, and especially to your kids. They look at you as a dad, as the superhero, and the person who does no wrong. And, obviously within reason, it's okay to admit that you don't know everything and that you've made mistakes here or there, and you work through those together. And then finally is just making sure they know, whether it's as a leader or a parent, how much you love them, how much you want to see them succeed. And they know that because you tell them often what a great job they're doing or what a great kid they are. I'm sure there's other things out there that I have not done that work great, but those things I have found, and it's taken, years and years for me to grasp a hold of some of those things and make those work. And, I have 2 adult daughters, and sometimes I still apply those things when they come to me for help, which I'm so grateful that even in their 20s, that they still come back to dad and ask for questions. And those are moments that you really need to grab onto, because that may not last forever. And so you look at those little nuggets as gems to take the opportunity to continue what you've learned and apply that even when they, perhaps may be gone and not living at home anymore.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us, and I hope all the best for you and your family, and maybe we'll have you on again in the next little while.
Yeah, I would love to, Tyler. Thanks for the opportunity, and it's always good to see you, and my best to you and your family as well. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again, Darin, for sharing these lessons with us.
I've learned a lot from you, and I'm sure others will be benefited by the time you've spent with us. And like you and I talked about just barely in this episode, I have been working on a place for all of us fathers to get together and share tips, tricks, stories, and be able to commiserate, as well as just build the camaraderie that you need in order to be successful as a father. It's a Facebook group called Primed Fatherhood, and it's open for anyone to join. So please head on over there, join the Facebook group with us, and let's continue the conversation over there. Thanks for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast, and also remember to stay primed.